Have you ever watched a film or maybe read a novel and just felt, wow, this is perfect? What makes some stories grab hold of you like that and stay with you?
It's a great question. And today, we're actually going back, way back, to look for answers in a text that's, well, it's basically shaped Western storytelling for thousands of years.
Aristotle's Poetics. It's kind of amazing how relevant his ideas still feel, isn't it? For everything from Greek tragedies to, I don't know, the latest streaming hit.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone, to another part of our Wisdom of the Philosopher series. We're going to journey into Aristotle's Poetics today, really trying to get under the skin of how stories function and why they affect us so deeply.
Okay, so let's lay out the plan. We really want to unpack Aristotle's main ideas about poetry, especially tragedy. We'll look at the key parts, what he thought its purpose was.
Things like the difference between universal truths and specific events, simple versus complex stories, and how tragedy compares to, say, epic poems.
Right, it's not just some dusty old book. Poetics gives us a kind of toolkit for understanding why stories work across all sorts of media.
It really does. It's foundational stuff.
And just before we dive in, if you find this exploration valuable, please do take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel.
And hitting that notification bell means you won't miss our future discussions. We'd also love to hear your perspectives down in the comments.
Definitely. Okay, Aristotle, where does he start?
He starts with a really fundamental concept, imitation. The Greek word is mimesis. He argues that this drive to imitate, to represent, is the basis for all the arts.
All of them, like epic poetry, tragedy, comedy.
Music, he mentions the flute and the lyre, or even dance. They're all, at their core, forms of imitation.
Okay, imitation. But obviously a play isn't the same as a piece of music, so how does he differentiate them?
Good point. He breaks it down based on three things: their medium, their objects, and their manner of imitation.
Right, let's take those one by one. The medium, that's what they use to imitate?
Exactly. So for music, the medium is harmony and rhythm. For dance, it's rhythm used to imitate character, emotion, action.
And for poetry or drama, it would be language, often combined with rhythm and maybe harmony and song?
Precisely. Then you have the objects of imitation. This is about what or who is being represented.
He talks about men in action, doesn't he?
Yes, men in action, and crucially, whether these men are depicted as sort of higher or lower types, better or worse than us in real life.
And that's the key difference between tragedy and comedy for him.
That's a big part of it. Tragedy tends to represent people as better, more noble than they are. Comedy often represents them as worse, focusing on the ridiculous.
Interesting. Not just good versus evil, but sort of elevated versus flawed.
You could put it that way. And the third element is the manner. How is the imitation presented?
Is it someone telling the story like in an epic poem?
That's the narrative manner. Or is it presented dramatically with characters acting out the events directly, like in a play?
Okay, that makes sense. Medium, objects, manner. It's a neat framework.
It really is. It helps categorize and understand the different artistic forms based on how they are imitating reality or aspects of human life.
So why do we even do this? Why this urge to imitate in the first place?
Now we get to the origins. Aristotle suggests poetry stems from two really basic human instincts.
Okay, what are they?
First, the instinct for imitation itself. It seems to be innate in us from childhood. And second, our natural instinct for harmony and rhythm.
And we actually enjoy imitation. Why is that?
Because learning is enjoyable, Aristotle says. When we see an imitation, even of something unpleasant, we learn by recognizing it.
He has that line, that is he, that little spark of recognition.
Exactly, that pleasure of understanding. It connects to why even difficult subjects in art can be compelling.
So these instincts are there. How did poetry, develop from that?
Well, he suggests it kind of branched off.
Right.
Writers who were more, let's say, grave or serious in nature started imitating noble actions and noble people. This led to things like hymns, praises, eventually epic poetry and tragedy.
And the others? The less serious ones?
The more trivial spirits, as he puts it, tended to imitate the actions of meaner people. This led initially to satires, lampoons, and eventually comedy.
So a split based on the poet's character. Where does someone like Homer fit? He seems pretty serious.
He does, but Aristotle actually gives Homer huge credit. He sees him as a pioneer not just for serious epic, but also for the dramatic form within epic, and even for comedy.
Comedy. Homer.
Yeah, by dramatizing the ludicrous, not just attacking specific people.
Right.
He mentions Homer's lost work, the Margites, as a kind of early form of comedy.
Wow. Okay. So Homer was multi-talented.
It seems so. But generally, Aristotle notes that both tragedy and comedy evolved pretty gradually. It wasn't an overnight thing.
Who pushed tragedy forward?
He mentions Aeschylus, who famously introduced a second actor, shifting drama away from just the chorus, and then Sophocles added a third actor, and also scene painting, making it more visually complex.
And comedy. Was its development similar?
Its early history is a bit fuzzier, Aristotle admits. Probably because it wasn't taken quite as seriously early on.
Right. Less prestigious, maybe?
Possibly. He does mention that plotted comedy, rather than just personal attacks, seems to have started in Sicily. And then a writer named Crates was apparently the first in Athens to adopt that more structured, less lampooning style.
Okay, so we've seen how these forms emerged. Let's focus now on tragedy, which Aristotle clearly thought was, well, a very high form of art. How did he actually define it?
Right, the formal definition. It's quite dense. He says tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude.
Okay, stop there for a sec. Imitation of an action. So again, it's about what happens, the plot.
Yes, fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
And that action must be serious, not trivial. Complete, having a beginning, middle, and end. And of a certain magnitude, it needs to have significance, some weight.
Got it. What else?
In language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of the play.
So fancy language, poetry, maybe song in the choruses, not just plain speech.
Exactly. Embellished language like meter and melody. Then, in the form of action, not of narrative.
Meaning it's performed, acted out, not just told.
Correct. And the final, perhaps most famous part, through pity and fear, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions.
Catharsis, the big one. The idea that watching tragedy cleanses us emotionally.
That's the traditional interpretation, yes. It purges or purifies these powerful emotions of pity and fear.
Okay, so that's the definition. To achieve all that, tragedy needs certain components, right? He lists 6 of them.
He does. The 6 parts are plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song.
And he's really clear about which one matters most.
Absolutely. Plot. He calls it the first principle, even the soul of a tragedy.
Why is plot so dominant over, say, character? That seems a bit counterintuitive, maybe.
Well, his argument is that tragedy is fundamentally an imitation of action, and life itself consists of actions. Our happiness or unhappiness, he argues, depends on what we do, not just what kind of people we are.
So, the story, the sequence of events, the structure, that's the ultimate goal. Characters serve the plot, not the other way around.
In his view, yes. The plot is the arrangement of the incidents, and it's paramount.
So, what makes a good plot, then, according to Aristotle?
It needs several qualities. First, it must be a whole, a clear beginning, middle, and end, logically connected, nothing random.
Makes sense. What else?
It needs to be of a certain magnitude, not too vast to be grasped, but not too small to be insignificant. You should be able to hold it in your memory.
Like a story that's coherent and has some substance.
Exactly. And crucially, the sequence of events should allow for a change in fortune from good to bad or bad to good, though tragedy usually focuses on the former. And this change must happen according to probability or necessity.
So it has to feel inevitable, or at least believable, not just coincidence after coincidence.
Right. It needs that internal logic. The structure is key.
This focus on universal patterns leads him to compare poetry and history, doesn't it?
It does. And he makes a bold claim. Poetry, especially tragedy, is actually more philosophical and more serious than history.
More philosophical than history. How so?
Because history deals with the particular, what Alcibiades actually did or suffered. Poetry, he says, deals with the universal.
Meaning?
Meaning it expresses the kinds of things that a certain type of person will probably or necessarily say or do. It reveals underlying truths about human nature and action.
So history gives you facts, but poetry gives you, like, universal truths about humanity.
That's the essence of his argument. It's why tragedians often use familiar myths or even real names, because what has happened is clearly possible, and it provides a framework to explore these universal themes.
Interesting distinction. Now, within plots, he talks about simple versus complex ones.
Yes, a simple plot involves just that change of fortune we mentioned without any fancy structural twists.
And complex plots.
Complex plots are the ones that include either reversal of the situation or recognition, or often both, intertwined with a change of fortune.
Okay, let's unpack those terms. Reversal of the situation, peripeteia. What is that exactly?
It's a pivotal moment where the action turns towards its opposite, but in a way that still feels probable or necessary. His prime example is from Oedipus.
Go on.
A messenger arrives intending to cheer Oedipus up, telling him he doesn't need to fear marrying his mother because Polybus and Merope weren't his real parents. But this news, meant to bring relief, actually triggers the horrific revelation of Oedipus's true identity.
Whoa, yeah, that's definitely a reversal. What about recognition? Anagnorisis.
That's a shift from ignorance to knowledge. It often involves discovering someone's true identity or the true nature of a situation, and it typically leads to a change in a relationship like love turning to hate or vice versa.
And the best kind is when it happens with the reversal.
Exactly. Aristotle thinks the most powerful effect comes when the recognition scene causes or coincides with the reversal, like in Oedipus. The discovery and the turn of fortune are locked together.
That makes sense. It doubles the impact. He also mentions a scene of suffering.
Yes, pathos. This refers to explicitly destructive or painful actions presented on stage, things like deaths, moments of agony, wounding, that sort of thing.
So these elements, reversal, recognition, suffering, these are the tools the playwright uses to stir up pity and fear.
Precisely. And Aristotle is quite specific about how to best evoke pity and fear. He analyzes what kind of character and situation works best.
It's not just any misfortune happening to anyone.
No. He argues you don't feel tragic pity and fear watching a perfectly virtuous person fall from prosperity to ruin that just feels shocking or unjust.
Okay, what else doesn't work?
Nor watching a thoroughly bad person go from misery to success that's unsatisfying. And even seeing an utter villain get their comeuppance doesn't really evoke pity or fear, maybe just satisfaction.
So who is the ideal tragic figure then?
It's someone in between. A character who isn't outstandingly good or just, yet their misfortune isn't caused by, like, outright vice or wickedness, but by some mistake or frailty.
An error in judgment. Hamartia.
Yes, hamartia. That missing the mark. Think of Oedipus again. His downfall comes from his persistent investigation, his pride maybe, but not from being inherently evil. He makes a mistake, a terrible one with terrible consequences.
So it's someone relatable whose fate seems disproportionate to their flaw, making us feel both pity for them and fear that something similar could happen to us.
That's the idea. It resonates because we recognize the potential for such errors in ourselves.
Now, what about spectacle? The visual aspect, costumes, scenery, effects?
Aristotle acknowledges that spectacle can produce an emotional effect. It has an attraction, but he considers it the least artistic part of tragedy.
Yeah.
He says it depends more on the stage manager or the stage machinist than on the poet's skill.
So for him, the real power of tragedy should come from the structure of the plot and the characters, not just flashy visuals. You should feel the pity and fear even just by reading the play.
Exactly. The story itself should be powerful enough.
Okay, speaking of character, beyond the tragic figure's flaw, what else does he say about creating good characters?
He outlines 4 key aims for characterization. First, the character should be good in a moral sense, revealing some sort of ethical purpose.
Okay, good. What else?
Second, they must have propriety, meaning they should be true to type a woman should seem like a woman, a slave like a slave within the conventions of the time, of course.
Right. Third,
they must be true to life, believable as human beings. And fourth, they need to be consistent.
Consistent, even if the character's defining trait is inconsistency.
Yes, then they should be consistently inconsistent, he says. The actions should flow logically, either by necessity or probability, from their established character.
It sounds like he wants characters who feel real and whose actions make sense within the story's world.
Very much so. He even compares the poet to a good portrait painter who captures the distinctive features, but also makes the subject look somehow better, nobler, while still retaining the likeness.
Ennobling them while keeping them recognizable.
Precisely.
What about the other elements, diction and thought? He doesn't spend as much time on those in Poetics, does he?
No, he refers the reader to his work on rhetoric for a fuller treatment of thought. But he briefly defines thought here as everything achieved through speech.
Like arguments, proving things, stirring emotions, making things seem important or unimportant.
Exactly. It's the intellectual and emotional content conveyed through the words. And diction is simply the expression of this meaning in the words the actual language used, whether it's verse or prose.
So thought is the what is said. Diction is the how it's said.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, he also compares tragedy to epic poetry. What are the main similarities and differences he points out?
Well, the main similarity is that both imitate noble characters and serious actions using verse. They're both high art forms.
But the differences are pretty significant.
Yes. Epic uses only one kind of meter, usually hexameter, and is narrative in form. It tells a story. Tragedy is performed.
And the length's right.
Big difference there. Tragedy tries to keep its action within roughly a single day, the unity of time, though he's not super strict about it. Epic has no such time limit. It can span years.
Does epic have any advantages because of its form?
Aristotle thinks so. The narrative form lets the poet describe multiple events happening simultaneously, which you can't easily show on stage. This gives epic a certain grandeur in scope.
And maybe allows for more of the marvelous or supernatural.
Exactly. He says the element of the wonderful, the irrational, has more scope in epic because the characters aren't physically present before us, making it easier to suspend disbelief.
Interesting point. He also touches on how to respond to critics of poetry, doesn't he?
Briefly, yes.
Yeah.
He notes that a poet imitates things in one of three ways: as they were or are, as they are said or thought to be, or as they ought to be.
And criticisms usually fall into certain categories.
Right. Things might be criticized as impossible, irrational, morally harmful, contradictory, or just technically incorrect from an artistic standpoint. He suggests ways the poet might defend against these.
It's like he's providing a framework for literary criticism itself.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Anticipating objections.
So after comparing them, does Aristotle have a final verdict on whether epic or tragedy is the superior art form?
He does. And perhaps unsurprisingly, he argues for the superiority of tragedy.
Why? What are his arguments?
He suggests tragedy is more refined, capable of producing its effect even without performance, just through reading. It has all the elements of epic, plus music and spectacle.
And it's more vivid.
Yes. He thinks it has a greater vividness, whether read or seen. Also, its effect is more concentrated.
Concentrated? How so?
Because it achieves its goal, the tragic pleasure, the catharsis within narrower limits of time and space. He believes this concentrated effect is more pleasurable than one diluted over a longer epic narrative.
And it's more unified.
Yes, he argues that a tragedy typically has greater unity of plot than an epic poem, which often contains plots for several tragedies within it.
So for Aristotle, tragedy is like the peak form, more focused, more intense, more unified, and ultimately more effective.
That's his conclusion, yes. More artistically complete.
Okay, wow. So just to quickly recap, we've journeyed through Aristotle's Poetics, looking at imitation as the core of art, how poetry might have started, his deep dive into tragedy, its definition, its crucial 6 parts, especially the plot.
Right. And the importance of things like reversal, recognition, the ideal tragic character, how poetry relates to universals versus particulars, and finally, his comparison with epic poetry.
It's really quite remarkable how this framework, laid out over 2 millennia ago, still gives us such powerful tools for thinking about stories today.
It truly is. It asks fundamental questions about why we tell stories and how they achieve their effects.
Which leads us maybe to a final thought for everyone listening. Aristotle argued tragedy was superior to epic. In our world today, with film, television, novels, video games, what forms of storytelling do you think fulfill that serious, cathartic function of tragedy?
And in following Aristotle, would you consider those forms somehow superior to others? Or has the landscape just changed too much? Something fascinating to think about as you encounter different stories.
Definitely something to ponder. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of Aristotle's Poetics within our Wisdom of the Philosopher series. We hope it sparked some new insights for you.
And once again, if you found this discussion engaging, please do like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. We value your engagement and look forward to reading your thoughts and questions in the comments below.